Hi everyone and welcome to fan commentary on Day of the Dino Part 2. The one thing I hadn't talked about in Part 1 was how I felt how Day of the Dino kind of adapted the elements from MMPR's pilot episode Day of the Dumpster, as well as Megaforce doing a similar thing. Dinothunder's, homage, references to MMPR's pilot were done much better than Megaforce because in Megaforce's case, it was pretty much verbatim copy to copy of what they did in the pilot. But Dinothunder, well, they had Tommy, obviously. They took key elements and styles, but told an original story throughout the entire pilot, which worked much more better. It's like, I like homages, I like references, anything that old fans would recognize and done well. But when they just copy an episode, which, they had good intentions. I'm not saying Megaforce, what they did was wrong. I did like it. I had said in a past review. But ultimately, Dinothunder did it much more better. It was much more in the style of MMPR, but also their own style. I think this is why I really like Tommy coming back, because the writers, when they came toward how they wrote the show, is that, okay, we have a person who's came back from MMPR. He's gone through all of this. Everything they've said they do and what they don't believe in and what they worry about. And he's like, well, how do I have Tommy talk like he knows everything without, confusing new fans? Even though this is an old character who comes back, we have to, not confuse kids and people who are just unfamiliar with the show, so that it just doesn't feel like this wall of, oh my God, 20 years of this show is here. I have no idea what's going on. And they really did a good balance throughout the entire season. I also really love the pilot of Dino Thunder for this particular reason. Majority of the PR seasons rarely ever meet the main baddie until near the end of the season. In this case, Kira meets Mesosgog right then and there, and we know exactly who he is. And you can see he's not the traditional baddie. He intimidates you and basically is trying to scare you into giving the information. Luckily enough, Kira, in her sense, is not falling for it because she doesn't really have anything to worry about technically. The gem is not with her. And of course, obviously, Mesosgog knows that, so he simply leaves and continues on to his work and leaves his lackeys in there. It shows that kind of how he treats, situations. She's just completely irrelevant to me. Even as a potential ranger, he doesn't care. It's just how it's so below. I wish they had gone and explained how the lair was created, because it's not really an ancient lair, because the Dino Thunder logo was made by Tommy and Haley, and if so that doesn't make any sense. So it would have been nice if we got a little bit of backstory there. I do complain about one thing from DT. Kira and the others never noticing that Principal Randall, I always never bought it. It just felt like very dumb for the sake of dumb. But I understand where they had to do that because, they realized it wouldn't really make a good reveal in the later. Another thing I also complain about is the invisiportals. We know they're points and points, like wormholes, that link between this dimension of their lair to the outside world. The problem is, it never really makes any sense how it works, because Kira just drops in on them in a few minutes, and it's just like, well, why does it link here? It doesn't really make much. Are they like preset portals? Does it simply, is it controlled by her mind? Maybe that's the reason why it attached to, Connor and Ethan, so it found them. but they never really go into any detail on how it works. This area looks very similar to the same area where Riley's parents' farm is. It has the same hilly area and further back. I do like how they try to, explain the background of Tommy in these little bits. It is still confusing to an older fan because we jump from race car driving to this. There's a lot of inconsistencies and connections, even though Haley does justify a lot of things, like she's the one who designed the morphers and all the high-tech stuff, while Tommy is, like, how did he work with Anton Mercer? He's the millionaire, billionaire company. Like, where did that, like, come to fruition? Like, how did that work from a person who's just, loves paleontology now, but still that doesn't really mean I work with $1 million person. And of course, we get introduced to our good old friend Zeltrax for the first time, who has this connection with Tommy, which unfortunately didn't go anywhere. But that's because technically the Abaranger footage, because the character is vastly different. Speaking of which, the reason why Tommy does not have his powers in the first 5 episodes is simply because in the pilot episode of Abaranger, Oscar lost his powers. His Dino Commander, the Dino Harp, the key, it broke. So he could not transform into the Black Ranger until he repaired it later on. Which helps in DT's case because you want to see the main characters first rather than, like, oh, why isn't Tommy morphing? Why isn't Tommy morphing? Although fans will, arguably, mention, like, how come he doesn't use his Zeo powers? How come he doesn't use this powers? It's a little bit of a fudge, but ultimately, I would see it as just Tommy. He removed himself after Forever Red. He probably just, he didn't want to bring it up, maybe because it attracts villains and bad guys all the time. So, I think that's the justification. It's just it's a very lame one, but at least it's something that you could think about. Now, the Tyrannodrones are US exclusive minions because they didn't want to use the Triptoids that they used later on in that goofy video game episode. And it falls in the same idea that they're too weird, that it will not really work as main villains in PR, like in Lost Galaxy case with the Stingwingers. So anytime we ever see these guys, it's always US footage. So they have to reshoot a lot of material, which, makes the show more expensive. They didn't have to do that. They could have worked with the Triptoids, but they said, we have this type of particular way we want to do Dinothunder. We want to be serious. We want to move away from Ninja Storm, any of the criticisms we there. So let's just spend the money and make these guys, but eventually work in the Triptoids. Even though they did work them in, oddly enough, they hardly ever used them in the US footage or used the Japanese footage fairly often. I think at that point, by the time we got them and they were so far into the Abaranger footage, they were able to just simply edit around them and ignore them, but bring them in just in case if they had to use the footage. It was just that just in case routine. This is how you reference PR. He just simply mentioned Lothar, and they're going to use that as like, oh yeah, they'll remember maybe he came back, and we can use that as distraction. That's all you have to do. I like little references like that. It doesn't have to be complicated, but don't make something like, oh, what are Power Rangers? I'm a superhero, and it's like that type of thing doesn't make any sense. And I never liked it when Ninja Steel did it, even in Ninja Storm when Tori didn't believe Dustin. It's just, why do you do those things? Here's a perfect example. This scene is to show that, Dr. O is a teacher who knows science. So, he shows he's competent enough in a lot of new areas that we haven't seen it before. But also, this is the way you reference classic MMPR's pilot, because in the pilot, we had an earthquake scene. And what do we have here? An earthquake scene. And it works really well into the Abaranger footage because, like I said, Abaranger is a very different beast compared to Dinothunder. I also love how blatantly you can clearly see it's Japanese footage for the Zords because there's a lot of Japanese signs all over the place. Now, what's happening in this is loosely similar to what they do in Dino Thunder, where Mesosgog took over control of the Biozords that Tommy was developing with Anton. In the Abaranger episode, the Zords, or Mecha in that case, they got thrown from the other dimension and they didn't have anyone that could connect to them. That's the reason why they've gone out of control and they're in a rampage. And because there's no rangers in this universe besides Aubrey Black. Which is interesting. It's a different take on MMPR, where they were, artificial completely. There was no any bio-organic brains in them. They were just mechanical Zords. I really like this case. I wish, Bandai or whatever could have, made a replica in a legacy line where you can actually store, and it also could have came with the replicas of the Dino gems inside their bracelets. I think the one thing I also loved about Tommy with the writers was that they used Tommy in a way to mimic Zordon. Why wouldn't he? Right now, he's in this predicament of I have these three teenagers that were chosen by the Dino Gems. I have no choice but to now guide them in becoming a Power Ranger team. And I understand exactly what they're doing, what they're going through, especially Tommy under other circumstances what he has dealt with. So he takes his experience throughout all those years that he's doing it and tries to help them and answers all their questions as fast as possible and tries to help sell them becoming heroes because they virtually have no choice because they'll still be attacked regardless from Mesogog. He will always go after them until he kills them in order to get the Dino Gems back. In the Abaranger pilot, this was a little bit more complicated. And originally, the morphers, if you want to call it, they were trying to pick new people to become the Abarangers themselves. And unfortunately, a couple of the characters they picked didn't work. So it was kind of a journey of who will become the red and blue and yellow ranger. So that's the reason why this happens at nighttime, because it was at search. And that's the reason why Tommy is technically not useful in the footage besides being roughly on the sidelines. Now, the morph sequence for Dino Thunder, for the most part, I thought it was very interesting. It's more cooler than Ninja Storms. I think Ninja Storms was a little bit plain, although I felt always weird that the whole flip thing in there. But I do like the detail they put into the morphing sequence because they had if you ever take off the faceplates on the Dino Thunder morphers, they have all these nice curved shapes and designs, abstract designs behind the faceplates, which is what they adapt into the morphing sequence. You could see those silhouettes on the walls, the energy effects everywhere. So they put in all those details that link up all the design elements to each part. In the Abaranger footage, this plays out much more different. In Abaranger, Asuka is actually dealing with Zeltrax's character counterpart right now. Also, a few things were changed during the editing because, like I said, Abaranger is a very extreme season, meaning in this case, lots of goofy elements and serious elements. So they do cut around a lot of this. So, and they do a really good job. When you watch Dinothunder, you don't feel like things are missing, which in a lot of cases you can tell whenever they do that in PR and there's a heavily changes done from the Super Sentai. Somehow they were able to get around certain things. I think a particular thing that I was surprised they were able to get around was that the morphers talk. That's the reason why they have a mouth on them. The reason why they talk is they're technically linked to the Zords in Abaranger. They just speak through them. The Zords in Abaranger are alive. They have personalities, they're funny, they're quirky, they're goofy, childish. So they always talk between them, and they always have funny lines and stuff, and they had to cut around all that material, which, worked really well. Though sometimes you can see that they're talking to them every so often. I never liked showing the T-Rex blaster because you can clearly see the Zords in that shot. I wish they had just done a live action version that didn't show that shot so that you wouldn't get spoiled of the surprise of how the Zords look like when they're normal. Speaking of the Zords in this state, now their colors are green, meaning that they're basically, kind of just going crazy, rampaging around the city. Now the green one was never released in America. It was a special limited edition color version. Think of the black colored versions. In this case, it was the lime green ones, which I think not a lot of people care for them. I particularly didn't care for them as much, but since they were a collectible item, I did get them. They were unique in that case, but they do have some, link to the show and some purpose. You could see a little bit of where Kira was kind of acting out of character. This was actually a little bit more harder in the Abaranger footage. They didn't unlock them in this case this easily. It went on a little bit longer. I wish they had done a little bit more with the green version of the Zords, like maybe this had popped up again, like they got disconnected from their morphers and rampaged again. It would have been interesting if they had explored that, because they really don't do much with the Zords at all in Dinothunder. Again, it's probably because of the Japanese footage making them talk and all this stuff, so they were mostly ignored. That's the one thing I never really cared for, when they ignore the Zords and treat them as objects, because they're a little bit more than that. But for the designs of the Dinothunder Zords, I don't usually buy everything from every season. There's like always various things I don't really particularly care about. But in Dinothunder's case, slash Abaranger's case, I thought it was very well, because it's a stark contrast compared to Zyuranger's design. While Zyuranger was in the early 90s, the designs were much more boxy, more robotic in appearance, more mechanical hoses and all this stuff. While in Abaranger slash Dinothunder, it's more organic, more extreme. You have more spiky parts. And they also had to deal with a transformation that only has three, pieces. So majority of the stuff goes to the Tyrannosaurus, and it has a nice, cool motorized function for the toy, which mimics the Dino drill fairly well. And of course, it has all these sub combinations like the sword and the shield, and you can operate it without the Pterosaur connected. So it has all these cool sub functions which you can mimic in the show, out of the show, and that really gives more, to your worth of purchasing the toy. While in MMPR's case, it's fairly light on features, what it can do. You can only have it in the basic modes. This is what also makes Mesosgog more interesting to a lot of people, and I think why they connect to him more than other villains is because most villains would yell and scream, like Rita, for example. He's the complete opposite of Rita. That's, I think, was what they wanted to do on purpose. All those things where they wanted to get away from Ninja Storm's goofy nature, it helped them design a better show because you could have easily copied Rita yelling and screaming, bopping people on heads, in Dinothunder's case, but they went, no, we want to keep the show serious, more dark-natured, and just keep the a comedy to light so that we can rein people, bring people back, and feel like, okay, this is PR again. We were not always just a goofball show, and it helped Mesosgog very well. And I also love that Lethem Games, the actor who plays Mesosgog, he could have easily just been voicing the character for the entire year. Instead, he actually is inside the the prosthetics, and he has that physical acting job down very well. He's also a really good actor because he's been in New Zealand before in other TV shows. I've seen him in other shows from New Zealand where he's worked there as well. So he's comfortable working in a foreign place for roughly the whole year. I think that's why everyone loves the character so much, because it's a stark contrast to other villains that's come out of here. Most villains, Trakina's goofy, for example, but she's dark. Same thing with Astrana, but they're all very goofy. Mesosgog, for 99% of the time, is serious, stoic, straight face. If you like my content, consider subscribing and leaving a like. See you in the next video.